Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Harold Holzer, Director of the Roosevelt House, and on behalf of Hunter College President Jennifer Rabb, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to our program tonight. As many of you know who have attended our programs, we claim a unique connection to Franklin Roosevelt here. This is the house where, as you all know, he recovered from polio, ran the transition to the presidency, following his election to the White House in 1932. But we know that we can't make a claim to a World War II connection, hard as we may try. The inspiration for building this house, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, died before America entered the war, and FDR immediately began the process of selling the house, happily, to Hunter College. But we do use the house as a benchmark, a stage for exploring how leaders face seemingly insurmountable crises against daunting physical odds. In FDR's case, watching for 4 months between Election Day and Inauguration Day while the Depression deepened and planning a national recovery here, even as journalists loitered upstairs in the parlor that you just entered, and demonstrators chanted outside his window for food. Some things don't really change that much. We know the program and the cabinet he created here and took with him to Washington. We know about the long nights of planning here for the crisis that he was going to face, the excruciating pressure he faced in the run-up to the inauguration, and we know that he somehow held it all together. In his case, with no stronger or more powerful a stimulant than a nightly cocktail or two upstairs in the library. In stark contrast, we have tonight's program. When we asked Norman Ohler to come to Roosevelt House, we thought we'd uncovered a secret research project that we would bring to the attention of our constituency here at Roosevelt House as a sort of scoop. But as anyone who reads the Times or the New Yorker or the New York Review of Books knows, as anyone who's consulted the bestseller lists knows, this extraordinary piece of research and writing has just exploded onto the scene. So now we're pitifully grateful to this celebrity author for coming here and keeping his appointment with us. The New Yorker calls him the writer who uncovered the Nazis' drug use, and that's a kind of an understatement. While Norman Ohler has made clear that he seeks no excuses or explanations for evil, he has found hidden a crucial layer of history that's long been ignored or concealed, and the work is absolutely revelatory. And he brings to it not only the skills of a master researcher, but the kind of personal and the skills of a novelist, which he is, and the kind of personal and professional experience that he might have invented for himself had he been creating himself as a character. He's the son of a judge, born on the site of a U.S. logistical headquarters in West Germany. He was embedded in American culture, he says, in his youth. He was an exchange student sent from Germany to Flint, Michigan. We can find out why later. And yes, he wound up in Michael Moore's documentary, Roger and Me, of course, because he was in Flint. He moved to the East Village, had his own drug experiences there, which he has talked about. I'm not revealing something that he hasn't talked about to the New Yorker. And the rest is history. So we are delighted to welcome him here, and we could not have a more perfect partner in conversation with him. Professor Benjamin Hett has taught at Hunter College and the CUNY Graduate Center for 14 years. He's the author of several prize-winning books, including Burning the Reichstag, an investigation into the Third Reich's enduring mystery. Crossing Hitler, the man who put the Nazis on the witness stand, is another one. He is currently writing books on the downfall of German democracy in the 1930s and on the West German intelligence services in the 1950s. Just the drill about the how we progress tonight. We will have this conversation, and then we will open the floor to questions. which will be moderated by our programming curator, Bill Goldstein. We will then invite you all to a book signing and reception upstairs, where books will be offered. You can get them inscribed by the author. The only admonition I have is I beg you all to just look at your cell phones and make sure they're off. I know you think they're off, but I know from bitter experience that one is not off. So if you look, and the reason is not only out of courtesy for our audience, but also because we are broadcasting this on Skype, on live stream to our students who like to tune in, and preserving it for our website, and we'd like to preserve it cleanly. So please welcome now, by way of Berlin, Flint, and the East Village, best-selling author Norman Ohler in conversation with Professor Head. Welcome.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Harold. And Norman, it's a delight to be able to welcome you to Roosevelt House and to Hunter College and have a chance to talk about this really fascinating book. I want to start just on the topic that you researched, because I think this is the kind of book that people who are historians of Germany in this period, when they come across this topic, and I'm speaking from experience here, they slap their foreheads and they say, oh my goodness, what an amazingly great topic. How come I never thought of this? So I want to ask you, how did you think of it? How did you come to this project?
Sheer coincidence, I suppose. I was looking for a topic for my new novel when a friend of mine, who's a DJ in a Berlin underground club, told me that the Nazis took loads of drugs, which is a crazy statement because I'd never heard about this before, but somehow it rang true. Like I said, yeah, I believe it. But this was kind of the starting point of doing first, obviously, a little Google research, and I found things here and there, but then actually taking on academic research and or actually archival research, because I decided to go into archives and look for original documents, and I was happy enough to find first things quite quickly, and then one thing led to the next. And I decided that this actually is a book and not just a crazy idea by a Berlin DJ.
It's interesting that you mentioned the archives, because one of the many things that impressed me about your book and that I really liked is just how archival it is. You really did your homework and went into the sources, and most of the citations are to things in various archives. I wonder if you could just give us a sense of some of the things maybe you found in some of these sources that people hadn't worked on before that were new or surprising.
Well, being a non-historian, as I was called by a German publication, I was not really sure how historians actually work. I mean, I studied philosophy and cultural sciences, and I was working in a new field.
You figured it out pretty well.
Well, I later found out that, for example, Joachim Fest, the main biographer of Hitler, did actually not go into the archives, but did actually use secondary sources, other books, and wrote his great book from secondary sources. I was quite surprised by that, actually. So for me, it was natural to go into the archives and really have a look. And it's not that difficult. I mean, archives are more chaotic than I thought they would be. The problem is that when documents were being labeled, that was usually decades before, so they weren't labeled with the same terms that we're searching now. So they're somehow difficult to use, but it's also a lot of fun to use them. And well, I was lucky that I did this research in Germany also. In Germany, it's very very good in keeping things, and so my first idea was, when I heard that Hitler had been taking drugs, which was new to me because Hitler is portrayed as a teetotaler. That was important part of the Nazi propaganda, to show Hitler as this clean-cut person, no alcohol, no private life, no tobacco. But I decided to actually have a look at his personal physician, and there's one archive in Germany which has all the writings of his personal physician, Theo Morell, and as soon as I had that in front of me, I realized that this is really an interesting story that demands a proper look.
Okay. I want to talk now a little bit about some of the ways in which your research, I think, does alter a bit of our understanding of what happened in this period. And I think this is the kind of thing that a lot of people find surprising about your book, but also really enlightening. So I wonder if you could tell us a few things, tell us about some of the instances where drug use did have some effect on how events unfolded during the Nazi period of the Second World War. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the campaign in France in 1940 or Dunkirk.
Well, what I found striking was the contradiction between Nazi ideology and the reality of a modern performance-driven society, which the Nazi dictatorship also was. On the one hand, the Nazis portrayed themselves, well, they started the war on drugs in a way. When they took power in 1933, they put a stop to the experimental situation, also in regards to drugs, of the Weimar Republic, the first democracy on German soil that the Nazis ended. They imposed strict laws against drugs. They very early on combined anti-Semitic policies with anti-drug policies, saying lots of Jews are taking drugs, and drugs are toxins, and Jews are toxins, and we have to create a pure German society that gets rid of all these unhealthy elements. And then the big irony is the hypocrisy of the system it becomes very visible when in the mid-30s a Berlin company called Temmler, which still is a global player today in the pharmaceutical industry, developed a new medicine, a cure-all, as they advertised it. And they branded this as Pervitin, and the active ingredient is methamphetamine, which today we know as crystal meth, very addictive and dangerous substance. But when it came on the market in Germany, it was advertised as helping you with depression, giving you a boost. You won't be tired anymore. You can work better. And this became very interesting before the war in 1938 to the German army, who focused on these two, on the following two attributes of Pervitin, of methamphetamine: fear reduction and the reduction of the need to sleep. So they started making tests with young medical officers. I actually think we can show something here. Give you an idea. Oh, this is just a cover. This was the Temmler factory who produced the Pervitin, the methamphetamine, and this drug became very popular in 1938 in Berlin, and the company expanded very quickly. You can see this small house here to the right. This is actually the beginning. This is how the company looked in the early 1930s, and this is how the company looked when they're full in production for this methamphetamine product, Pervitin, which was more popular than coffee in Germany. Coffee was expensive. Coffee had to be imported. Methamphetamine was easily produced and gave you the little kick that you might want in your daily life in the modern performance-driven society, Germany. And then it is certainly no surprise that the army starts. There's one professor called Ranke who is wondering, could this be beneficial to the German soldiers? And this is how the factory looks today. It's abandoned now and kind of a ruin. This was the beginning of my research. I found out about this factory and went there. It's on the outskirts of Berlin, and I could actually walk in, and I was standing inside the former drugs lab of the Third Reich, you could say. This is just an example of how popular methamphetamine was in Berlin, because this is an ad for a chocolate laced with crystal meth. And you see, she's very happy. One little chocolate contained 13 milligrams of methamphetamine, which is apparently a very high dosage. And the recommendation was to eat between 3 and 9 of those, and that would be less harmful to your health than caffeine, which obviously was wrong. But I studied numerous clinical studies of German universities at the time, all very happy with methamphetamine but you can see that the scientists were already ideologically, they weren't thinking clear in a way. Like many comment on their studies saying this is perfect drug for our times. People should take this. They will become part of this great awakening of the German society. That was the Nazi ideology. The Nazi term was Germany, wake up. So it kind of fits that a methamphetamine, which keeps you awake, became the drug of choice. So it's a very long answer, I'm aware of that, but I just we got into the slides now, and I think they're quite interesting. These are experiments that the German army did on young medical officers, testing whether Pervitin, methamphetamine, was really keeping people awake, and they did these, they got them all together in a room that started at 8 p.m. This photo was taken at 4 a.m. in the morning, and you can see, for example, that they got Pervitin, is P, Benzedrine, which is an amphetamine, which is also keeps you awake, caffeine, which is C, and S is Scheintablette, which is placebo. So you see, like here's a.
The caption actually says the tiredness of the isolated, the tiredness of the ones who are getting the placebo. Whereas
placebo people were not happy at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Or they were happy, maybe happily sleeping, while the Pervitin people were like still like, where's the next thing? Where's the next questionnaire I can fill out? Yeah, some more of that. Oh, here we have a yawning placebo guy. But yeah, that was my answer. Or I don't want to speak. I don't want to monologue like Hitler, because he was infamous for talking and talking.
Well, okay. So then the Second World War begins, and this research sort of gets applied, and it gets applied particularly in how these things are given to German soldiers. So what are some of the ways in which these drugs got used by the German army, practically speaking, in the Second World War?
Well, this Professor Ranke, after he did these experiments, he was completely convinced that the German army should use methamphetamine in an organized fashion in a massive scale for their aggressive plans towards Poland, first towards Poland. And he couldn't convince his superiors. The Surgeon General was skeptical. He didn't understand what Ranke was writing to him. I mean, Ranke was was a pioneer in thinking of a soldier as kind of a machine or a machine part that can just be enhanced. But Surgeon General didn't understand yet what Ranke was going for. And then Germany attacked Poland, and there had not been an official ruling on whether meth should be used or should not be used. But Ranke wrote to medical officers in the field after Poland had been attacked, and this is one of the letters he got back. This is from a tank division, Panzerdivision, and this doctor writes back that Pervitin works very well against depressed mood in the battle in the battlefield. The experiences are very positive. Take one tablet, and you won't be tired. And this is just one of hundreds of reports that he received from the front in Poland from medical officers, and he gathered all this material and presented it again to the Surgeon General, saying, for the next campaign, which was, obviously talked about that now the West would be attacked, we should use Pervitin in an organized fashion, and he actually succeeded this time. And I'm not sure if we have a slide. Yeah, this is the slide. This is the so-called stimulant decree. It was issued in April 1940, distributed to all medical doctors of the army and the Waffen-SS, saying that for a next campaign, which was obviously the attack on Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and France, methamphetamine should be distributed, should be given out. It details how much should be given out. Talks about side effects. One of the side effects that are listed here is aggressive behavior. Probably was one of the reasons to use it. It says how long it works. 2 tablets should be given. So it's a patient information leaflet in a way for the soldiers. And between the issue of the stimulant decree and the actual attack on May 10th, millions of dosages of crystal methamphetamine were being distributed to the German troops, 35 million dosages actually. And they were being taken on May 10th, and the German army showed a very strange behavior in the battlefield that surprised the Western Allies, because they just were able to move in an unprecedented speed. And this was the Blitzkrieg, and it's not that the Blitzkrieg was created because of Pervitin, but the Pervitin worked really well with the strategy, which was dependent on the time factor. So it's an important factor, I would say, in these early speedy campaigns by the German army.
Right. I mean, one of the things I thought was particularly fascinating about your book is that, so when the Germans invaded France in 1940, they had this particular strategy devised by a German commander named von Manstein for what was supposed to be called the sickle cut. The Germans would just run tanks right through a particular part of the Allied line in the Ardennes forest and then drive straight for the English Channel and split the French and British armies. And as Norman was saying, they did this incredibly quickly. The tanks just kept going because the crews are all hopped up on methamphetamine. They just keep driving. And then they arrive at the Channel port town of Dunkirk. And now one of the things that military historians really puzzle over with World War II is that after scoring this amazing success and advancing incredibly quickly and running for days, the German tanks come to Dunkirk, and the British army is basically trapped there on the beaches, and it's not sure if any of them can be evacuated, and the tanks stop, and they don't knock the British out. And historians have been scratching their heads, for decades now, trying to figure out, why did Hitler stop the tanks there? Why didn't he crush the British when he could? And there have been various theories advanced, and your work casts a really interesting new light on this issue.
Well, I mean, I scratch my head too, because it's rationally you can't really understand it. It doesn't make sense. I think there's several factors that come into play here, and one of them is that Hitler actually didn't understand the Blitzkrieg. He was shocked by his tank generals Rommel and Guderian that they moved so fast, and that they were moving faster than he could give orders how they should move, and this was very uncomfortable for him, being the dictator who was dictating every move of everything. So suddenly Rommel was already 60 kilometers ahead of Hitler's thinking, and Hitler's described as a military dilettante in a way, or he still thought in terms of the First World War. He didn't really understand this modern quick movement, and certainly didn't understand his hopped up tank generals who just kind of invented the campaign as they went along, and just didn't care about stopping and waiting for the decisions to be taken. They took their own decisions. So they were faster than the dictator allowed it. So he kind of put a stop to that, saying, no, when it was about to be completely successfully finished, he stopped the tanks in order to regain control of the situation. And another key player comes into focus here, which is Göring, the head of the German Luftwaffe, who said that because there was always a rivalry between the Prussian army generals and Hitler. The Prussian army generals thought Hitler was an idiot, and Hitler thought they're not ideological enough. So Hitler preferred Göring and the Luftwaffe. They called the National Socialist Luftwaffe, while the army was like the Prussian army. And so Göring said, we should finish the job here at Dunkirk. Let me use the Luftwaffe to destroy the British troops, which was a ridiculous idea, because you can't really destroy a whole ground army from the air. I mean, you can certainly cause a lot of casualties, but it's not the way it should be done. But Goering, who was certainly overestimating his capabilities, was able to convince Hitler to let him do the job. And I make also the case that Goering, overestimating his faculties, that this has to do with Goering being a morphinist, because Goering was injured in 1923 in the Hitler Putsch. He had been shot in the stomach and had been using morphine since then. Hitler often also says, later on when Goering did more and more mistakes, Hitler would say to him, "Oh, he's a morphinist. He doesn't know what he's doing." But at the time, Goering was still in high regard, also as a military person. So I'm kind of just trying to cast a little bit of an alternative look and trying to find answers to that question that is unanswered till this day. Why did he stop the tanks? It was a big mistake, probably the biggest mistake that he did. Fortunately.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, let's talk more about Hitler himself. I mean, in some ways, I think the real villain of your book is this Dr. Theo Morell. Can you tell us a little bit about Morell and Hitler and what it is that Morell brought to Hitler?
Well, I wouldn't say he's a villain, actually. I would say he's a fascinating character. In a way, he even saved the world, you could say. So he's also a hero. But he's certainly an opportunist and a very weird, maybe not even weird. I mean, he starts off as a celebrity doctor in Berlin. He has a well-going practice on Kurfürstendamm, which is the main boulevard in Berlin. He treats actresses, sports stars, blue bloods, everyone. He's a Dr. Feelgood of Berlin. People go to him, they get a nice testosterone injection or hormone injection or vitamins, and he was very good giving injections. Apparently you didn't feel if he gave you an injection. So he was very popular and an expensive doctor, but he was also famous for treating diseases that don't exist. So you wouldn't go to him if you really had a problem. You would go to him if you wanted to feel a little bit better about yourself and life, which at the time, Berlin being this bustling capital, many people, had that desire. But then he met Hitler in 1936 through a common friend, Hoffmann, the photographer of Hitler, who had a sexually transmitted disease, STD, in Munich. And he didn't want to consult a Munich doctor because he was embarrassed. So he called on Morell, and Morell flew down from Berlin to Munich, cured him. And as a thank you, Hoffmann introduced Hitler and Morell. He gave a dinner at his home. The two men met. And Hitler complained about his stomach cramps that had been torturing him for years and that all his doctors cannot cure. And Morell, who was an avant-garde doctor in a way, as I described, gave him a probiotic medicine, which was also unheard of at the time, and which now is, I guess, very popular also still. And this cured Hitler, and then Hitler said, "This is the doctor, he's a genius." And the two men became very close. Morell's wife was against this. She said, "You don't have to become Hitler's personal physician. We will not spend time together anymore. You will be with Hitler the whole time." This is exactly what happened. Hitler spent more time with Morell than with anyone else. And a very close relationship developed, very intense relationship, because Morell would actually give him an injection each day, at least one, from 36 to 45. I mean, there's reports in Morell's notes from late 44 where he can't penetrate the veins anymore because they have been perforated so many times. I mean, it's pretty insane what happened between them. But of course, it's interesting what was in those injections. What did actually Hitler receive? And from 36 to 41, mostly it is vitamins and glucose and things that might even be beneficial to your health, but it changes. And so I certainly focus on the years 41 to 44 when Hitler's not happy with vitamins anymore and wants a lot of hormone injections, which have effects on his health. And then 43, for the first time, he receives a very strong opioid injection before an important meeting with Mussolini. In July in 43, Mussolini wants to leave the war effort, and Hitler's very nervous. It's a very detailed description of Morell about that day. Hitler's about to cancel the meeting, and everyone is very disappointed and kind of hopes for him to go because it's obviously an important meeting. And then Morell decides to give him Oikodal, which is an opioid similar to heroin, but it makes you euphoric. And Hitler, receiving that opioid, completely changes and is very optimistic, and obviously takes that meeting. And there's several witnesses describe that meeting where Hitler talks for 3 hours nonstop. Mussolini just sits there and starts sweating more and more and tries to tell the Führer, who's totally energetic, and tells him how obviously the war would be won, and how, of course you're not going to leave, we're in this together. And in the end, Mussolini stays. And in the evening, Hitler says to Morell, the success of today is thanks to your help. And from that moment on, Morell uses that help more and more often until 1944. Hitler, there's months when Hitler receives this opioid, very strong, 20 milligrams of Oikodal intravenously injected every other day, and must have become physically dependent on it because that substance is very strong, a narcotic.
So then this, I think...
So Morell's not a villain, but he certainly plays a very decisive role. And the Americans, when the Americans capture him, they try to find out, is he a villain or is he not a villain? Should he be on trial in Nuremberg? And they decide, no, he just treated Hitler in a very intense way, but they don't prosecute him in the end.
This, I think, does raise a really important question, and again, it's something interesting in your book. And the question, since obviously how Hitler did his job mattered historically a great deal. So how do you think this, this extraordinary intake of drugs that Hitler's getting, especially from 44 on, from Morell, how do you think this affected how Hitler did the job of being dictator and war leader of Germany?
Well, it's very hard to say how Hitler would have behaved without the drug, because that would be speculation. So with the drug, he certainly used the drug. This is very clear from Morell's writing. He always used this opioid Oikodal when he had important meetings where he needed his former charisma, which kind of crumbled as the war went really bad, where he needed the power to convince his generals, who were very much in touch with reality, who would come to the table telling him, we have to change strategy, or it's going bad, we have to do this or that. He would use the opioid to remain to remain functioning and in a certain type of mood that would enable him to convince the generals that he knows something that they don't know, or that he actually has a bigger picture of the situation. And I read quite a few reports of baffled generals coming out of the meetings saying that Hitler again did the trick and convinced them all to stay on course, and that probably he has a secret weapon up his sleeve, or he knows things that they don't know, he can't share, or he doesn't want to share. So he used the drugs, according to my research, in order to stay on track, to keep his tunnel vision, it contributed to what I call the bunker mentality. Hitler didn't want to see what was actually going on. He stayed in his bunker, and he used also the drugs to bunker himself in, and to create these protective walls around him, to just feel great about himself and continue to be convinced and not break down, or he was using the drugs to not have a reality check, I guess you could say.
So the last little bit of your book talks in particular about the Navy at the end of the war, and how a particular admiral named Haya had come up with the idea of giving crews, particularly of small submarines, drugs so they could go out on very long missions as sort of the last desperate way they could try to stop Allied sea movements. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, one of the things that happened when I was doing research was the more I looked, the more I found. And there was one particular story that you just mentioned about the German Navy. We have an image. Yes. This is a letter where the Temna factory is being told by the German Wehrmacht that their product Pervitin is decisive for the war. So it was officially acknowledged here. But I want to go into this topic, what you just explained. The German Navy in 1944 had basically lost the U-boat war. The big German U-boats were not effective anymore. The Allies had a superiority in U-boats, and so the Germans developed mini submarines manned by one person. Here we see one person getting into one of these mini submarines. Very young people at the time in 1944. They used 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds for these missions. And these mini submarines, they were quite small. They were basically as big as a torpedo, which was underneath the mini submarine. And the idea was that these missions would last for about a week. And during this week, they couldn't sleep because they were alone in these things. And they would go all the way to the Thames River, for example, and then torpedo British and American ships. And obviously, it's not possible for a human being to stay awake for a week. And even methamphetamine was only tested to help you stay awake for 2 days and 2 nights, 3 days, 3 nights perhaps. So the Navy was actually looking for a wonder drug. They tested 10 different drug combinations. There was a point in time where they were fixated on drug number 9, as they called it, D9, which was a combination of methamphetamine, cocaine, and Eukodal, Hitler's favorite drug. And the first tests they did with young sailors were catastrophical. They were not able to actually function in these mini submarines. And then the Navy did a series of experiments in the concentration camp of Sachsenhausen. Actually, when I presented this research to Hans Mommsen, whom I worked with, or who helped me with this book, the late Hans Mommsen, German historian of National Socialism, he said he'd never heard about this. Which totally surprised me, but that it wasn't known. I mean, because what the Navy did quite elaborate tests with drugs in the concentration camp, and later posed as the clean German part of the war machine. And we at the Navy, we never committed war crimes. So this is what they did in concentration camps, giving inmates different drug combinations and then seeing what would work best, what kept inmates awake the longest, and then taking their findings and giving that to these young sailors. It's certainly one of the darker chapters of List, I would say.
And indeed, the admiral who was sort of spearheading these efforts is Admiral Haya, as you describe in your book, of course. Having sent these very young crews out to, in most cases, certain death because the casualty rate was very high, let alone having been involved in these horrendous concentration camp experiments. Of course, he was brought to his just desserts in West Germany at the end and was put on trial and brought to justice, right?
Haya?
Yeah.
Well, Haya served for the Christian Democratic Party in the West German Parliament for quite a while.
Yeah.
Being an advisor to Konrad Adenauer.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was quite shocking, actually, when I found that out.
In line with what you were saying about, well, the Navy was the clean service, so obviously.
But I don't know how known this is, but many Nazis actually had a second career in West Germany. Or, for example, you mentioned General von Manstein, who was responsible for war crimes in the Soviet Union. Later on was one of the responsible people for organizing the tank force of the West German Army, biggest ally of the American forces, obviously.
Well, he was very good at it.
Huh?
You want to tank
Well, he
general?
was a brilliant military man. Yeah. So Germany used him again.
He wrote an autobiography called Lost Victories, the theme of which was if Hitler had taken the advice of people like him, they wouldn't have lost.
Yeah, that is kind of also the approach that Stauffenberg had planting the bomb in July 20, 1944.
Yeah.
It's kind of the statement of these Prussian military strategists saying Hitler is a military dilettante, we should get rid of him so we can win the war.
Yeah. All right, well, I think at this point we will open it up and start moving to audience questions. The gentleman in the red shirt there.
I've never done meth, but
Good.
I've been recently binging on Breaking Bad, and my impression is that the folks who do meth are kind of wrecks. I don't know, the constant use by the soldiers or the population, wasn't, I would think, would not have benign results.
The meth that the German factory Temmler produced was not as harmful as the crystal meth you might buy on the street. That's point number one. But still, obviously, methamphetamine is an addictive drug, even if it's pure and made by a pharmaceutical company. And there were casualties. Professor Ranke went to the front in 1940 and examined this, and he found that many, especially older officers, had suffered from Pervitin. Some died from heart attacks. And there was correspondence within the army about this, and then the Surgeon General wrote, in German it's called Heeressanitätsinspekteur, I just translated as Surgeon General, but that was his position. He wrote that we have to overlook health hazards for the individual. The greater good is of higher importance. So they were obviously cynical about that, or very military about that. But it did create problems, and the army was also trying to install a rehab program for addicted soldiers. Especially the Air Force was successful with that. They had a rehab program for the pilots that had flown too many missions on Pervitin.
Gentleman in the front row here.
You describe in the book how when the Germans came through Belgium and France through the Ardennes, that they kept going because they were on Pervitin, shocking the French soldiers, that they just kept coming and coming and coming, and reducing their inhibitions in continuing to fight at that point. Did the reduction in their inhibitions also cause or give the Army and the Waffen-SS a greater opportunity to commit the massacres of the Jews in Russia and Poland that they might not have without the Pervitin?
I've been asked this question several times, and I really would love to have the answer, but I don't have it because I didn't find any documents about these Einsatzgruppen. But I think it really is an interesting question, and I would love to do more research on that. But I haven't found anything. I'm not sure if there are no documents or whether they had been destroyed or whether I just haven't found them yet.
Sir?
I once spoke to a psychopharmacologist at UCLA who said that the hobby of war was always accompanied by the attempt to change your head, because it always took something to get people to run into guns or swords, and they couldn't do that without either alcohol or something. The tertio, which was the Spanish and military tactic, was just a group of 1,000 men marching slowly into guns, and they just kept doing it. And anecdotally, and I don't know that this is true, my father was behind the lines of the Battle of the Bulge for 69 days, when the usual rotation was 21. And he said that in his kit there were amphetamine, and that it was a It was not acknowledged, but every army had it.
Well,
And I also heard that LSD was used on the flyers, and they just kept flying their planes into mountains.
well, there's a very good book by Lukas Kamienski. He's a Polish scholar. He wrote a book called Shooting Up, and then he examines the whole history of war and drugs. And you're absolutely right that war always has been connected with drugs. We could perhaps say that the Nazis were the first army to use a very potent pharmaceutical drug on a mass scale, and actually the Allies learned from that abuse or from that use. When the British examined planes that were being shot down over Great Britain, Luftwaffe planes, they found Pervitin in them, and then they had their own program. The Air Force, Royal Air Force, had their own program, testing. There was a British doctor responsible for it, testing, comparing methamphetamine with amphetamine, and then deciding the Allies should use amphetamines. And the Americans kind of took those findings from the British and then also stocked their soldiers with amphetamines. That's why your father had them. So that was the Allies reacted to the Germans in a way.
Lady there, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you. Are either of you gentlemen aware of something called the F scale that was evidently used by our State Department? American psychologists after the war wanted to determine markers that made you prone to fascism or not. One of them, for example, was belief in the occult. And if you are familiar with that set of studies, was use of intense drugs one of those markers that would indicate that you would be attracted to fascism or you were a fascist?
I'm actually not aware of the F scale. Are you?
I'm afraid I'm not. Sounds interesting.
But in a way, also methamphetamine is neutral. It doesn't make you a Nazi. It could even make you a Trump supporter.
Some people think that astrology is neutral.
Well, yeah.
Right.
What was the drug use like after the war for the military and the general population, and the did they still sell those things, and what is it like now, and how has it changed?
Well, Pervitin was very popular on the black market after the war. Everything you wanted to buy in Germany at the time, you bought on the black market because normal shops were destroyed, and there was still a lot of Pervitin around from the Wehrmacht because they had so much, and suddenly they didn't exist anymore. So, and then quite early on, Temna starts producing again, and Pervitin. But I haven't researched this in detail, but apparently it was also used by the so-called Trümmerfrauen, which the so-called debris women, which were clearing the German towns of the rubble so that the buildings could be reconstructed. Apparently they were also given Pervitin so they could do this. There's a film by Billy Wilder called 1, 2, 3, where the manager of the Coca-Cola company, who sets up office in Berlin, says to his secretary when she asks him, "How do you want your coffee today, sir?" He says, just black with 2 Pervitin is going to be a rough day. So apparently Pervitin was still very popular in the 50s. And also amphetamine, Benzedrine, that was the brand name here in America, was very popular in America in the 50s. And methamphetamine was very popular in Japan after the nuclear destruction. It was used by a population that was completely down to kind of boost themselves up again or get some artificial strength to be able to cope with the situation and get back up on its feet somehow. So it didn't stop with 45.
I think you should do a volume 2 because it's really interesting that the Trümmerfrauen and the rebel women would have been using Pervitin, because for Germans after World War II, this is one of these things that's sort of like a very redemptive story, the idea of these, with all the men either dead or in prison, the women were sort of literally rebuilding cities with their hands, and this is something that post-war German memory really hung on to, is like, here's something clean and good in our country, and they're on Pervitin. That's really interesting. Hey, we have time for 2 more questions. Sir in the Fletcher.
Did you find out Allied targets over Germany? Pharmaceutical companies were not targeted in Germany?
Well,
Were
they changed
bombed?
strategy in late 44 and decided to bomb pharmaceutical companies. And in December 44, the Merck company in Darmstadt was completely destroyed. And this immediately created problems, even for Hitler, because Merck was producing Eukodal, his favorite opioid. And Morell's notes show that he's running out of Eukodal in the beginning of 1945, sending his aides on motorcycles through bombed-out Berlin from pharmacy to pharmacy, trying to find a pharmacy that still stocks Eukodal because it wasn't produced anymore. So the British, that was really an effective campaign in a way to destroy these companies.
Okay, in the blue cap at the back.
What percentage of the German army or infantry would you say was using these drugs on a regular basis throughout the war?
Well, the records are very detailed about the French campaign, so I could study how it was distributed and what parts of the army were actually taking it. And it was especially tank troops who were leading the advance, and Air Force pilots. So they really used Pervitin to a very large extent. So the 35 million tablets for this campaign were not distributed in an even fashion, but they were clustered at these two groups that I just mentioned.
So before we go upstairs, first of all, I want to thank Benjamin Hett and Norman Ohler for a fascinating presentation. And as I hope you remember, because you haven't taken any stimulants, you have to remember this on your own. We're all invited upstairs for stimulants of the liquid kind and a chance to meet and buy the book by Norman Ohler. I just want to acknowledge one guest. I like to acknowledge people who make a special effort to come and speak, and it's a pleasure to welcome my friend who I think you probably all know, the great actor Richard Dreyfuss, who's here. So please join us upstairs.